80 years ago, in 1939, one of Hollywood's most beloved classic films was produced, The Wizard of Oz. To mark this anniversary, we're setting out along the yellow brick road to remember and visit the final resting places of the talented artists who made that film the enduring emerald gem that it is today. Join us as we hitch a ride on a tornado to the land of Oz. There would be no Wizard of Oz film if there hadn't been a book first. At Forest Lawn in Glendale, California, we find the final resting place of the man who started it all, author L. Frank Baum. He published The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1900, with illustrations by W. W. Denslow. It became the best-selling children's book in the years to follow, and Baum would pen 13 more novels about the land of Oz. In the final years of his life, Baum worked to get The Wizard of Oz produced for the stage and in early film. He produced several silent short films based on the writings of Oz, but would not live long enough to see the most iconic film made about his story, the one we're featuring today, 1939's The Wizard of Oz. The hero of Baum's book is a young Kansas girl named Dorothy Gale.
She isn't coming yet, Toto.
And the hero of the 1939 film, the young actress who played Dorothy, was one of Hollywood's brightest stars, Judy Garland, who rests here at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Garland, born Frances Ethel Gum, was performing not long after she'd learned to walk. At the age of 13, she was signed to MGM, and when it came time to cast Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, Shirley Temple and Deanna Durbin were considered, but the role went to Judy. And 80 years later, it's hard to imagine anyone else in that role.
We must be over the rainbow.
She was 16 at the time of filming, and the following year would earn an Academy Juvenile Award for her performances in The Wizard of Oz and Babes in Arms. She would continue to act and sing for us for decades, her passion for entertaining never dwindling, until a barbiturate overdose took her life at the age of 47. After her death, she was originally entombed at the Ferncliff Mausoleum in New York, but in 2017, nearly 50 years later, her remains were removed here to Hollywood to be closer to her family. Her career was storied and diverse, but to many she will always be Dorothy, a young Kansas girl singing over the rainbow.
Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Dorothy's constant and most faithful companion throughout the film, both in Kansas and the Land of Oz, is a little dog named Toto. He was played by animal actor Terry, a female Cairn Terrier. And you don't have to travel far from where Judy lies to find this monument to Toto, also here at Hollywood Forever. Terry was reportedly paid $125 a week, more than some of the human actors in the film. She can be seen on screen in close to 24 other productions of the era. After her death in 1945, she was buried on her owner's property, which years later would be paved over by the 101 freeway. So in 2010, a campaign was successfully undertaken to have a monument to Toto placed here at Hollywood Forever. Two of the first characters we meet in the film besides Dorothy and Toto are Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, Kansas farmers and Dorothy's guardians.
Don't bother us now, honey. You see, this old incubator's gone bad and we're like to lose a lot of our chicks.
Auntie Em was played by Clara Blandick. To find her final resting place, we head just up the hill from where L. Frank Baum is buried, to the Great Mausoleum in Glendale. Her niche is here in the Columbarium of Security. Clara was a character actress known for playing eccentric matriarchs, perfect for the role of Auntie Em, Dorothy's symbol of hope and home.
Dorothy, where are you? It's me. It's Auntie Em. We're trying to find you. Where are you?
I'm here in Oz, Auntie Em.
Clara continued to act into the 1950s when her health began to deteriorate. She suffered severely by her 80s, and in 1962, she decided to, in her own words, make the great adventure. She took an overdose of sleeping pills at the age of 85. Within the walls of this same mausoleum, not far from Clara, in the Columbarium of Inspiration, is the man who played Uncle Henry, Charley Grapewin. He was a circus acrobat and stage performer for years before entering silent film. He had retired in the 20s, but after the 1929 crash, lost everything, prompting a second career on screen.
Dorothy? Well, what has Dorothy done?
What's she done? I'm all but lame from the bite on my leg.
Me, she bit you?
No, her dog.
Oh, she bit her dog, eh?
In the 1939 Wizard of Oz adaptation, he was the only actor who appeared in Kansas who didn't appear in Oz, since Auntie Em appeared in The Witch's Crystal Ball. Charley Grapewin can also be seen as Grandpa in The Grapes of Wrath. He lived to be 86. When Dorothy is swept up by a cyclone to the land of Oz, the first resident of that magical place that she meets is a good witch.
I'm Glinda, the Witch of the North. You are? Oh, I beg your pardon, but I've never heard of a beautiful witch before. Only bad witches are ugly.
She was played by Billie Burke, who rests here at Kensico in New York. Before being cast in The Wizard of Oz, Billie was famous on Broadway and in early radio and film. As the Good Witch, Billie protects young Dorothy on her journey to the Emerald City and bestows upon her the ruby slippers. 1 year prior to The Wizard of Oz, Billie was nominated for an Oscar for her performance in Merrily We Live. She died at the age of 85 and is buried here next to her husband, Broadway impresario Flo Ziegfeld. Among the most lovable and memorable characters Dorothy meets in the Land of Oz are the Munchkins.
What are munchkins? The little people who live in this land. It's Munchkin Land.
Over 100 little people and children were cast to play the villagers of Munchkin Land, including the Earl's siblings, known as the Doll Family. The Munchkins were even collectively credited in the opening titles. MGM's costume department had to create over 100 unique costumes for each Munchkin actor, with careful cataloging to make sure each looked the same every day of production. At Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri, we find the crypt of one of the longest surviving Munchkin actors, Mickey Carroll, who actually went to school with Judy Garland. He played Munchkin Land's town crier, as well as a marching soldier and a fiddler. He retired from acting shortly after filming The Wizard of Oz, returning to Missouri to make cemetery monuments. In fact, when the grave of L. Frank Baum's niece, Dorothy, the namesake of his young heroine, began to fall into disrepair, Carroll created a replacement marker for her. After Dorothy dropped in on the Wicked Witch of the East, quite literally, the residents of Oz had to be sure she was positively, absolutely, undeniably, and reliably dead. So they called in the coroner.
He's really most sincerely dead.
The man who played Munchkinland's coroner was Meinhardt Raabe. It was his only film role, but one he would be remembered for his entire life, delighting fans by reciting his lines from the movie. Later in life, he was a pilot during the war and a spokesman for Oscar Mayer, known as Little Oscar, the world's smallest chef. He lived to be 94, and we find his final resting place at Emmanuel Evangelical Lutheran Church Cemetery in Farmington, Wisconsin. As the Munchkins celebrate the death of the Wicked Witch, various guilds welcome Dorothy to Munchkinland, including the Lullaby League and the Lollipop Guild. A Munchkin clad in green hands a giant lollipop to Dorothy as a thank you.
We wish to welcome you to Munchkinland.
The actor who played that lollipop kid was Jerry Maren, who we find resting here in the Courts of Remembrance at Forest Lawn, Hollywood. Maren was the last surviving Munchkin and the longest living Wizard of Oz actor with a sung or spoken line. After The Wizard of Oz, he continued to act throughout his life, appearing in shows like The Beverly Hillbillies, Bewitched, and Seinfeld. He would make regular appearances at Wizard of Oz conventions well into the next century, with other long-living Munchkins. He lived to be 98. As they celebrate, their reverie is abruptly interrupted by the arrival of the film's antagonist, the Wicked Witch of the West, played by Margaret Hamilton. With her green skin, false nose, and piercing cackle, Hamilton's Wicked Witch has become one of cinema's most iconic villains.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
She also played the loathsome Miss Gulch in the Kansas scenes. The role was not altogether pleasant for her, though. While filming the scene where she exits in a pillar of fire, Hamilton was severely burned when the pyrotechnic effect went off too soon. She had to recuperate in the hospital for 6 weeks before returning to work. Margaret Hamilton is the only star of the principal cast whose grave we are unable to visit, as she doesn't have one. After her death at the age of 82, she was cremated, her ashes scattered. With the Wicked Witch of the West gone, Glinda and the Munchkins sent Dorothy on her way down the Yellow Brick Road toward the Emerald City. Along the way, she makes a few new friends, the first of which is a scarecrow, stuffed with straw and short on brains, who's not particularly scary either.
I haven't got a brain, only straw.
How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?
I don't know. But some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?
The role was played by vaudevillian Ray Bolger. He was originally cast as the Tin Man and Buddy Ebsen as the Scarecrow, but he expressed a desire to play the Scarecrow, his rubbery dance style fitting the character perfectly, so the roles were switched. He also played farmhand Hunk in the Kansas scenes. Ray would be identified as the Scarecrow for the rest of his life. He also had a memorable role in Disney's Babes in Toyland. After his death at age 83, he was entombed here in the mausoleum at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California.
We're off to see the wizard.
As the two new friends continue down the yellow brick road, they come across what looks like a metal statue. It was the poor Tin Man, frozen in place from rust, pining for a heart. A few dabs of oil and he was good as new.
Beautiful. What a nickel.
It's empty. The tinsmith forgot to give me a heart.
At Holy Cross Cemetery, not far from the mausoleum where Ray Bolger rests, is the man who played the Tin Man, Jack Haley. The role originally went to Buddy Ebsen, but he suffered a near-fatal allergic reaction after inhaling the aluminum dust from the silver face makeup. Jack Haley was then cast, the makeup modified into a paste rather than a powder. His Kansas counterpart was a farmhand named Hickory. Jack Haley lived to be 81, dying, somewhat ironically, of a heart attack. And so the duet became a trio, and the three new friends continued together down the yellow brick road, which passed through a dark and ominous forest, which they feared was full of lions and tigers and bears. They weren't wrong. Moments later, they came across a lion, one who just so happens to be quite the coward.
Why, you're nothing but a great big coward.
You're right, I am a coward. I haven't any courage at all. I even scare myself.
In New York's Union Field Cemetery, we find the man who played the lily-livered king of the forest, Bert Lahr. The beloved vaudevillian and comedian was known for his quick wit, ad-libbing some of the lion's performances and lines. His costume was fashioned from an actual lion hide and recently sold at auction for over $3 million. Like the Scarecrow and Tin Man, Lahr would forever be associated with the Cowardly Lion. His Kansas counterpart was named Zeke. Lahr died in 1967, and when Judy Garland heard of his passing, she dedicated her performance of Over the Rainbow that night to her beloved Cowardly Lion. The Fellowship of Oz was now fully formed, and on they continued to find the wizard, each with their own unique request. But their path would not be unencumbered, facing new foes along the way, including the Wicked Witch's flying monkeys.
Now fly! Fly!
At Valhalla Cemetery in North Hollywood, we find one of the actors who played a flying monkey, a man named Buster Brodie. He can be seen in a number of other roles through the 40s, mainly smaller uncredited roles. He died in 1948 at the age of 62. Before he would grant their requests, the Wizard of Oz demanded the troupe retrieve the Wicked Witch's broom. This perilous journey would take them right into the heart of the witch's lair, patrolled by the Winky Guard, who were surprisingly grateful after Dorothy melted the Wicked Witch.
She's dead. You killed her.
I didn't mean to kill her.
Hail to Dorothy! The Wicked Witch is dead! Hail! Hail to Dorothy! The Wicked Witch is dead!
The captain of the Winky Guard, who voiced this gratitude, was actor Mitchell Lewis, who rests here at Forest Lawn, Glendale. Lewis performed in over 200 productions in his career, including a role in the 1925 version of Ben-Hur. He died in 1956 at the age of 76.
Please, sir.
Having retrieved the witch's broom, the gang was finally able to return to the Wizard of Oz to have their wishes granted. But the wizard was not forthcoming. Dorothy and her friends weren't having it, though, giving him the business when the intrepid Toto pulled back the curtain on the wizard.
Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
The man behind the curtain was character actor Frank Morgan, who rests here at Greenwood Cemetery in New York. Not only did he play the wizard, but if you keep your eyes peeled, you'll see him in 4 additional roles, as Professor Marvel, the gatekeeper, the carriage driver, and the guard. More roles than any other actor in the film. Morgan died of a heart attack in 1949, several years before the first televised broadcast of the film in 1956. Neither he nor Charley Grapewin living long enough to see the renewed popularity of the film in the years to follow. Dorothy's time in Oz has finally come to an end. Her return to Kansas not facilitated by the wizard, but in fact by the power inside of her and on her feet. And so, as Technicolor gives way to sepia tone, Dorothy reminds us of one simple truth.
There's no place like home.
But wait, before we roll credits, there's another simple truth to remember. It takes more than great actors to make a movie. And some of the most iconic aspects of 1939's Wizard of Oz came from talented men and women behind the camera. Take, for example, the music, tunes that 80 years later many of us can still sing by heart. At Ferncliff Cemetery in New York, where Judy Garland was originally laid to rest, we find the songwriter who penned the music for those memorable tunes that keep us humming long after we've left the theater. Harold Arlen wrote the songs for the Wizard of Oz, like We're Off to See the Wizard,
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
the songs the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion sing,
And my head I'd be scratching while my thoughts were busy hatching if I only had a brain.
and of course, Over the Rainbow, which not only won the songwriters an Oscar, but is considered the #1 greatest film song in Hollywood history.
Over the rainbow, way up high.
Ironically, the song was originally cut from the film after a test screening, only to be later put back in. Arlen wrote the music for the songs and worked with a lyricist named Yip Harburg. Harburg was cremated after his death, so we are unable to visit him. The incidental music you hear between the songs is called score. The man who wrote the score for The Wizard of Oz was one of the preeminent film composers in the 30s and 40s, Herbert Stothart, laid to rest here at Forest Lawn, Glendale. He won an Oscar for his score for The Wizard of Oz, and is also known for films like Mutiny on the Bounty and Pride and Prejudice. Another musician who worked on The Wizard of Oz is found here at Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills, at the Lincoln Terrace. This is Ken Darby, who did some of the vocal and orchestral arrangements of the music. Not only that, but he was the voice of the mayor of Munchkinland.
As mayor of the Munchkin City, in the county of the land of Oz.
The Munchkin voices were all overdubbed by voice performers like Darby, and even Pinto Colvig, the voice of Goofy. Toto was one of the big stars of the film, but there was a human being behind the animal actor, a man named Carl Spitz. Here in the Great Mausoleum, we find the niche of Carl Spitz, the owner and trainer of Terry, who played Toto. In 1927, he opened a dog training center in Studio City, developing a method of using silent hand signals to direct the animal actors. He was a pioneer in dog training in early Hollywood, working with a number of animal stars that would appear on screen in that era, but none were ever so famous as little Toto.
Toto, darling. Oh, I got you back.
For audiences in the 1930s, The Wizard of Oz was quite the visual spectacle, with special effects that hold up to this day. The tornado scene in particular was quite impressive. Made from a 35-foot-long wound piece of muslin cloth, spinning around a miniature Kansas farm. The man who realized all of the special effects for The Wizard of Oz was the head of MGM's special effects department, Buddy Gillespie, who is laid to rest here in the Columbarium of Heavenly Peace at Forest Lawn, Glendale. He was nominated for an Oscar for his work on The Wizard of Oz, and in his career would win 3 Oscars, for Ben-Hur, Green Dolphin Street, and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. If there is one costume piece in Hollywood history that is considered the most iconic, one might safely say the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. Adrian, buried here at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, was the costume designer to the stars in the 20s and 30s, working with every major leading lady of the era. Adrian designed the elaborate and colorful costumes for The Wizard of Oz, including, and perhaps most notably, the ruby slippers, a pair of which is on display at the Smithsonian. And you'll be curious to know that in the book, the slippers are silver, but the filmmakers wanted to take advantage of the relatively new Technicolor and showcase a more dazzling color, so they opted for ruby red. Another aspect of the film that makes it so visually striking is the production design, the sets. The entire film was shot in a soundstage, including the farm scenes, so everything had to be created. That's where art director Cedric Gibbons comes in. He was known for imbuing MGM films with larger-than-life splendor, and The Wizard of Oz was no exception. He and his team turning an empty soundstage into fully realized and believable worlds. Gibbons was nominated for an Oscar for The Wizard of Oz, and over his career would take home 11 of the iconic gold statuettes, which, incidentally, he designed. After his death, he was laid to rest here at Calvary Cemetery in Los Angeles. Actors, costumes, and decorated sets are no good to us unless they are captured on film for us to see. At Hollywood Forever, we find the man behind the camera and lights, Harold Rosson, the cinematographer for The Wizard of Oz. He too was nominated for an Oscar for the film. He's also known for films like The Asphalt Jungle and Singin' in the Rain. He lived to be 93. Many filmmakers will tell you that a movie is actually made in the editing room. Everything else is just gathering the raw materials. We're at Inglewood Park Cemetery now, in the Mausoleum of the Golden West. In the alcove of Spring, we find the niche of the woman who cut the film together into the movie that we know and love, Blanche Sewell. She wanted to be an actress, but became a negative cutter and then an editor, one of the early female editors in Hollywood. She was only 50 when she died in 1949, not living long enough to see the film's renewed popularity on television. If we head back to Forest Lawn Glendale, in the Garden of Honor, we find the man who oversaw the entire production of the film, the producer, Mervyn LeRoy. He was responsible for the decision to make The Wizard of Oz at MGM, a film that would not only become one of the most culturally iconic, but according to the Library of Congress, the most seen film in movie history. Quite the legacy, one he acknowledges right here on his marker. Finally, we find the man who was the creative vision of the film, the director, Victor Fleming, here in the Abbey of the Psalms at Hollywood Forever. The film actually went through a number of directors during an early troubled production, but Fleming took over and directed the bulk of the film. It was quite a year for Fleming, who also directed Gone with the Wind, two of Hollywood's greatest films, back to back. When Fleming left to direct Gone with the Wind, King Vidor filled in to finish the film, mainly the Kansas scenes. Victor Fleming died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 59. And that concludes our tour. Now let's tap our heels together 3 times, think to ourselves there's no place like home, and to bid farewell to the Land of Oz.